Well, good afternoon. Happy Sabbath to you all, and also welcome to everyone also on the webcast. Now, Vienna in Austria is home to the Lipinzaners. Now, carefully bred since the 16th century, they combine power, flexibility, and beauty. Now, audiences marvel at the Lipinzaners' precision. Now, the young steeds are enrolled at near age 4, and it takes 4 years of training to prepare the horses. Now, their seemingly effortless performance shown during their shows pays tribute to their acquired self-control. They are a wonder to behold and a great illustration of the value of self-control. Now, my sermon today, I'll be concluding a series I've been going through on the fruits of the Spirit as we look into the last of the fruits of the Spirit that Paul lists in Galatians 5, and that is the fruit of self-control. Now, we can define self-control as the active control of our thoughts, emotions, and actions, where we bring them in harmony with God's way rather than letting them control us. Now, self-control acts as an anchor for building God's character, as it takes a lot of self-control to exercise the other 8 fruits of the Spirit. Now, the Greek word translated self-control, enkratia, is derived from 2 other Greek words, en and kratos. Now, en means in, and kratos means strength or power. Now, from kratos, we get our English word democracy. And from these Greek roots, we see that enkratia essentially means power or strength within. Now, my previous message on meekness, we saw that that word comes from the Greek word praetes, meaning strength under control. So these last 2 fruits are very close in meaning to each other. Now, when we looked at meekness, we explored the attitude of humility that motivates proper self-control of our passions and our desires. Now, today, we'll look at the discipline that helps make this self-control possible. Now, 2 proverbs draw a stark contrast between not having self-control and the great value of having it. Now, the first says, like a city whose walls are broken down is a man who lacks self-control. That's Proverbs 25, verse 28. The second states, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. And that's Proverbs 16:32. Now, it's important that we control our emotions so we don't do things that we later regret. The wrong kind of anger, pride, jealousy, lust, and greed can be powerful emotions to stop once they get ahead of steam, and we have to be diligent at avoiding them and letting them get stirred up within us. Now, on page 24 of our United Church of God booklet, The Fruit of the Spirit, Don Hooser writes, "We need self-control to avoid not only outright evil, but also too much of the good things. Proverbs 25:16 cautions, 'Have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be filled with it and vomit.' Now, people often lack the self-restraint to stop when they should. People overeat, overdrink, overspend, and overindulge in lots of things. We must rule our appetites rather than letting our appetites rule us. Overindulgence can lead to intoxication and or addiction. In either case, the person is then really out of control." End of quote. Now, a key to understanding and developing self-control is to understand how habits are developed and can be changed. Now, we're all creatures of habit. A habit is a learned pattern of acting, a way of behaving that has become routine. The more times that we respond to certain stimuli in the same way, the more worn the neural pathways in the brain and nervous system become. Eventually, our responses, how we act, think or feel, become automatic to a specific stimulus. Doing something the right way enough times, such as picking up after ourselves or refusing that extra drink, builds good habits. Conversely, if we choose the wrong option enough times, procrastinating or becoming impatient or whatever, we will form bad habits. Now, the neural pathways in our brain grow and shrink based on how often we reinforce or refrain from a particular way of acting or thinking. Now think of the neural pathways in your brain like a grassy path. The more we tread on the same path, the more that path develops. Now if we keep going down that same path enough, that automatic behaviour turns into a rut, like the wagon wheel ruts on the trails out to the American West. Now thankfully, if we've developed bad habits, the reverse can happen. If we resist going down the path long enough, it shrinks and becomes like a grassy path that slowly becomes overgrown. The habit loses its power and is no longer automatic like it used to be. Now, the first step in taking control of ourselves and overcoming bad habits is to be convinced that breaking the bad habit is worthwhile, rather than vacillating between wanting and not wanting to change our behaviour. In John 16:8, Jesus said, and when it, talking about the Holy Spirit, has come, it will convict the world of sin and of righteousness and of judgment. Now, the power and prompting of the Holy Spirit convicts us of sin and righteousness. Too often we want to take the path of least resistance, which all too often is not the right way. We need to keep our focus much more on the long-term problems and hurt that our sinful habits cause, and less on the sin's short-term benefits. We need God's Spirit to convict us more deeply. Only God's way works in the long run, and to give us the power to live with godly self-control. Now, the second step to breaking bad habits is to understand the influences or situations that spark old habit patterns and avoid them whenever possible. Now, Solomon in Proverbs 5 talked about not even going near the door of an adulterous woman. Now, the third step is to show wholehearted discipline in avoiding the bad habit and replacing it by repeating a right pattern of behaviour as often as you can. Now in 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5, we read that we are to bring every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. Now if we want to overcome our sinful habits, a half-hearted approach just won't cut it. Our effort needs to be wholehearted, even though we will fail at times, which is a natural part of the process. The more often you do the new habit instead of the old one, the more automatic the new behaviour will be, and the less automatic the old behaviour will be. Now, depending on the habit, experts say it usually takes between 1 and 3 months to form a new habit and for it to become automatic if we are consistent in not reinforcing the old behaviour. Now, most people slip from time to time in the process of struggling against a bad habit. Now, failure is certain only if you give up. Get up and start again and keep at it. Now, some of you will remember Mr. Armstrong's booklet, The 7 Laws of Success. The very important 6th law of success is perseverance. Now, the contemporary English version translates Proverbs 24:16 this way: even if good people fall 7 times, they will get back up. Now in Romans 8:14 we read, for as many are as led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. Now normally God's Spirit only leads us. It doesn't push us, it doesn't force us. It leads us, and then we have to make the choice to follow that lead or not. And in 1 Corinthians 14:32 we read, the spirit of the prophets are subject to the prophets. We have to do God's will because we want to, not because we have to. For the most part, God leads us with gentle promptings by his Spirit on our conscience. This is because to build true character in us, the good that we do needs to be by our consent. God's Spirit doesn't force us to do anything, but it does work with our conscience as that still small voice from God that helps motivate us as well as empower us to do the right thing. Now there's a battle that goes on in our minds all the time between the flesh and the Spirit. Now that battle is clearly defined by the word but. For example, God's Spirit will motivate us to be patient with some guy who's really giving us a hard time. If we say, I know I should be patient with this guy, but, and then we act on the but, we've poured a little bit of water on the Holy Spirit. Now, the same could happen where we have offended someone who may have also hurt us as well. We might think, I should apologise to him, but he hurt me just as much, and he isn't apologising. Do we act on the thought prompted by God's Spirit, or do we act on the but and refuse to swallow our pride and make peace with our brother? And we might think, I know I shouldn't look at that, but I really want to. Do we act on the first part, motivated by God's Spirit, or on our own lusts? Now, here's one example I'm sure we can all relate to. I know I shouldn't buy that giant block of Cadbury chocolate, but it's calling my name and saying, eat me. Now, another example is where we might have a thought that we should do some good deed or do something nice for someone, and then we think to ourselves, but I don't feel like it, or it's too inconvenient. Do we act on the thought prompted by God through his Spirit to do a good deed, or do we act on the but? Now, we're faced with lots of these big and little choices each and every day. As we act on the first part that tells us to do the right thing and ignore the but, we will develop self-control and develop more of the character of God. Now, another part of self-control is being balanced. In Joshua 1:7, Israel's new leader Joshua was encouraged to walk in God's ways and turn neither to the right hand nor to the left. Now, that expression, don't turn to the left or to the right, is an interesting one, and it kind of implies not going to one extreme or the other. Now, Steiner offers the following appendix in his book, The God Who Is There, to illustrate that often the true godly traits fall in the centre of two not so godly traits. For example, the extremes on either side of orderliness are pedantry and disorderliness. On either side of bravery is cowardice and recklessness. On either side of concern is apathy and oversensitivity. On either side of equanimity is rigidity and vacillation. And on each side of needed confrontation is hurtful criticism and closing of one's eyes. Now, we also need to be balanced mentally. Our knowledge, perspectives and understanding should be balanced. Now, it's important we are not too close-minded, while on the other hand, we don't want to be so open-minded that our brains fall out. And 1 Thessalonians 5:21 tells us, prove all things, hold fast to the good. And 2 Timothy 1:7 also tells us, for God has given us not a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. It's important to have a sound mind. Now, some points to consider in having a sound mind in relation to spiritual knowledge include: don't be dogmatic with scriptures where there are multiple possibilities or the scriptures aren't completely clear. Don't force the scriptures to match your own preconceived ideas. Be humble by having other people who are mature put our views to the test, as opposed to pushing our views onto others, and having a balanced level of importance with our views. For example, don't emphasise prophecies or various doctrinal points at the expense of more other important topics, such as developing godly character. Now, after his list of 9 fruits of the Spirit, Paul tells us, against such there is no law. The contemporary English version translates that phrase this way: there is no law against behaving in any of these ways. So in conclusion, each of us must rule over ourselves before we can rule over others, as promised to those who overcome in Revelation 3:21. Self-control is active control of our thoughts, emotions and actions. The key to self-control is to root out automatic behaviour that is wrong by repeating good habits long enough that they become the new norm with the help and power of God's Spirit. Now, this takes bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ, ignoring the but motivated by the flesh, and following the lead of God's Spirit. And self-control also includes being balanced and avoiding extremes on either side of the narrow path that God has called us to travel along. So let's all strive to develop godly self-control along with all the other wonderful fruits of God's Holy Spirit.